All right, let's talk about it. World War II. It's, without a doubt, the single biggest, most destructive conflict in all of human history. I mean, this is a war that literally redrew the world map and, it still shapes all of our lives today. So, we're going to break it all down. Okay, to even begin to wrap our heads around the scale of this thing, you got to start right here with this number. We're talking 70 to 85 million people. Let that sink in. Million. It's a number so big it's hard to even picture, right? But that's the real story here. The unbelievable human cost. So you see a number like that, and the big question just screams at you, right? How? How on earth did this happen? How did the entire planet get pulled into something so devastating? Well, the answer, it's not simple. And it definitely didn't start overnight. We have to go back, way before the first shots were fired. All right, so let's set the stage. The world before the war. Because, this conflict didn't just pop up out of thin air. The seeds were planted way, way earlier. Okay, so there are a few major things stirring the pot. First up, you've got the Treaty of Versailles. This was supposed to end World War I, but honestly, it just made things worse for Germany. It piled on this crushing debt and created a lot of anger. And that anger was the perfect breeding ground for these aggressive new leaders. We're talking Hitler, Mussolini, Tojo. These guys came to power promising to make their country strong again. And their idea of strong was, well, invading other countries. And what about the international community? Well, there was this thing called the League of Nations, which was supposed to keep the peace. But it was pretty much powerless to stop any of this from happening. So with all this tension in the air, you can probably guess what happened next. Countries started picking sides. The world basically split right down the middle, and these two huge alliances started forming. And here they are. On one side, you had the Axis powers. The big three there were Germany, Italy, and Japan. And on the other side, you had the Allies. This was a huge group, but the main players were the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, China, and, eventually, the United States. Okay, so the teams are set, the lines are drawn. What comes next is 6 straight years of some of the most brutal fighting the world has ever seen. Let's hit the major turning points. So it all officially kicks off in '39 when Germany rolls into Poland. For the first couple of years, honestly, the Axis powers were just winning. Big time. They took France in 1940. But then comes 1941, and everything changes. Germany makes this huge mistake and invades the Soviet Union, opening up this gigantic, brutal Eastern Front. At the same time, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, and boom, the US is in the war. That's the real game changer. After that, the tide slowly starts to turn. You get the D-Day invasion in '44, which is really the beginning of the end for Hitler. By 1945, it's all over. Germany surrenders, and then a few months later, Japan does too. Now, we really have to zoom in on Pearl Harbor for a second, because this one event, it's a massive deal. That surprise attack is what flipped the switch and brought the entire industrial and military power of the United States into the fight. And let me tell you, that was absolutely decisive. The war would not have ended the same way without it. But victory, man, it came at a price that is just staggering. Now we need to talk about the human cost of all this. It's truly heartbreaking. So we're back to this number again, 70 to 85 million. But here's the most tragic part. A huge number of them, the majority in fact, were not soldiers. They were civilians. We're talking about regular people, families, kids. Entire towns wiped off the map by bombs, or caught in the crossfire, or worse. And within that horror is another number that we have to talk about separately. 6 million. That's the number of Jewish people who were systematically murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators during the Holocaust. It's one of the darkest, most horrific chapters in the entire story of humanity. So, the fighting stops. What happens then? Well, the world that came after the war looked completely different. A whole new global order was basically born from the rubble. Okay, so 3 really big things happen right away. First, the world gets together and creates the United Nations, hoping to make sure something like this never, ever happens again. Second, 2 of the big winners, the US and the Soviet Union, they went from being allies to being bitter rivals. And that kicked off the Cold War, which would last for decades. And third, the old world map got totally scrambled. The big European colonial empires, they were weakened, and they started to fall apart. This led to a ton of new countries gaining independence all over the world. This quote here really nails it. World War II wasn't just a war. It was like a hard reset for the whole planet. It completely shuffled the deck on who had power, and it laid the groundwork for the world we live in today. Everything from technology to the very idea of international human rights. And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. It's been more than 80 years, right? But the echoes of this war, they're still everywhere. You can see them in today's borders, in our political alliances, even in the very institutions that are supposed to keep the world safe. So the real question for you and me is, how does this one massive conflict, all those years ago, still shape the world we live in right now?